A busy millionaire barely noticed the quiet presence of the humble cleaning lady in his luxurious home. Everything changes the moment he catches his wheelchair-bound son, previously isolated, speaking words in 9 different languages. The woman, who had been invisible until then, revealed a rare gift capable of transforming lives. At that moment, he realized that his life and his son's would never be the same again. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The fine autumn rain kissed the windows of the Anderson residence in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a stately Victorian home that stood as a testament to James Anderson's success as a tech entrepreneur. Inside, Elena Suarez moved silently through the hallways, her hands busy with domestic chores as her mind raced with worries. 6 months had passed since she'd crossed the border, fleeing the turmoil in her homeland, and every day in America felt like walking on thin ice. At 34, Elena possessed a quiet dignity that belied her circumstances. Her dark eyes, always alert, scanned the surroundings for signs of danger, a habit formed from years of looking over her shoulder. Today, she was dusting the bookshelf in 10-year-old Michael Anderson's bedroom, while he sat motionless by the window, his gaze fixed on the falling rain. "Mikey," she whispered, using the nickname everyone in the house used for the boy. "I'm just going to clean around your desk, okay?" No response, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. Elena was used to this. Since she'd started working for the Andersons 3 months ago, she'd never heard Michael speak a single word. His father had explained during her interview that his son had autism and hadn't spoken since he was 4 years old, after his mother Caroline had left them for another man in California. Elena moved toward the desk, careful not to disturb the meticulous arrangement of colored pencils and papers. As she reached for a stack of drawings to lift and dust beneath them, something caught her eye. Among the swirls of color and abstract shapes were symbols, precise, deliberate strokes that Elena recognized immediately. Her heart quickened. Chinese. Characters, not random scribbles but actual ideograms, drawn with surprising precision for a child. Elena glanced at Michael, who continued staring out the window, seemingly oblivious to her presence. With trembling fingers, she examined the papers more closely. The characters were arranged in sequences that made sense, simple phrases, elementary expressions. One sheet had the character for water repeated several times, each attempt more refined than the last. "Michael," she said, forgetting to use his nickname in her excitement. "Did you write these?" For the first time since she'd known him, Michael turned his head toward her. Their eyes met briefly before his gaze dropped to the papers in her hands. Elena hadn't planned to reveal her knowledge. It was dangerous to show too much of herself, but something about the boy's silent struggle resonated with her own isolation. "This character," she said, pointing to one of his drawings, "means water in Chinese, shui." Michael's eyes widened slightly, a barely perceptible change that nonetheless sent Elena's heart racing. She continued, her voice soft but clear, "And this one means tree, shu." The boy's fingers twitched at his side. Elena took a breath and decided to risk more. She picked up one of his colored pencils and on a blank sheet wrote the character for sky, then beneath it the Spanish word cielo and finally the English sky. "Tian," she said, pointing to the Chinese character. "Cielo, sky, all the same meaning, just different languages." Michael's hand moved slowly toward the paper. He touched the character for sky, then looked up at Elena with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Tian," he whispered, the sound barely audible but unmistakably clear. Elena froze, afraid that any movement might break this miraculous moment. Had she actually heard him speak after months of silence? "Yes," she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. "Tian, very good, Michael." "Tian," he repeated louder this time. "Sky." Then, to her astonishment, he added, "Cielo." 3 words, 3 languages, after years of silence. Elena was still reeling from the encounter when James Anderson returned home that evening. Tall and distinguished at 42, with prematurely silver temples that contrasted with his otherwise dark hair, James carried himself with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to controlling his environment. The tech security firm he'd founded had made him wealthy, but the personal tragedy of his wife's abandonment and his son's condition had left emotional scars that wealth couldn't heal. "Mr. Anderson," Eleanor said, catching him in the hallway after he'd hung up his coat. "Something happened today with Michael." James looked at her with the weary skepticism of a parent who had heard too many false hopes. "What is it, Elena?" "He spoke," she said simply. 3 words in 3 different languages. James stared at her, his expression cycling through. Disbelief, hope, and suspicion. "That's not possible. Dr. Winters has been working with him for years. The best specialists in Boston have seen him." "Please," Elena insisted, "let me show you." She led him to Michael's room, where the boy was now arranging his colored pencils in a precise rainbow pattern. Elena knelt beside him, pulling out the paper from earlier. "Michael," she said gently, "can you tell your father what this is?" She pointed to the Chinese character. Michael didn't look up immediately, and Elena felt James's skepticism radiating behind her. But then the boy touched the character and said clearly, "Tian Sky Cielo." James stumbled backward as if physically struck. "My God," he whispered, moving forward to kneel beside his son. "Mikey, can you say that again?" For a moment, Michael was silent, his eyes fixed on his pencils. Then, without looking up, he said, "Tian, Chinese for sky." James looked at Elena with eyes wide with wonder and confusion. "How is this possible? What did you do?" Elena hesitated, aware of how precarious her situation was. "I noticed he had drawn Chinese characters, real ones, not just random symbols. I recognized them and I just told him what they meant in different languages." "You know Chinese?" James asked, surprise evident in his voice. "Some," she admitted, downplaying her fluency. "And other languages. I had a good education before." She trailed off, unwilling to elaborate on her past. James didn't press her. His focus had returned to his son, who was now writing another character on a fresh sheet of paper. "What's this one, Mikey?" "Huo," Michael said. "Fire, fuego." James ran a hand through his hair, visibly overwhelmed. He hasn't spoken in 6 years, not a word, not to me, not to therapists, not to anyone. He looked at Elena with new eyes. "Whatever you're doing, please don't stop." The implications of James's request hit Elena like a physical weight. Continuing meant forming a deeper connection with the family, becoming more visible, more vulnerable to discovery. Yet looking at Michael, who was now carefully drawing another character, she knew she couldn't walk away. "I can try to work with him," she said cautiously. "But I'm not a therapist. I don't have—" "You got through to him," James interrupted. "That's more than anyone else has done in years." He stood up, decision made. "I'll increase your pay. You can spend more time with Mikey, teaching him this language method of yours." Elena knew she should decline. Getting closer to the family meant greater risk of her undocumented status being discovered. Yet the memory of Michael's voice, emerging from years of silence, made the decision for her. "I'll do my best," she said quietly. That night, after the house had gone still, Elena sat at the small desk in her basement room, writing in her journal by the light of a single lamp. She recorded the day's miracle in careful script, adding it to the chronicle of her journey from professor to fugitive to domestic worker. She wrote of Michael's breakthrough and the frightening new responsibility she'd accepted. What she didn't write, what she barely allowed herself to think, was how desperately she needed this connection as much as the boy did. In Michael's silent world, she'd found a reflection of her own isolation, and in helping him find his voice, perhaps she might reclaim something of the woman she used to be. Outside, the autumn rain continued to fall on the sleeping city of Cambridge, washing away the day's traces and preparing the world for tomorrow's possibilities. The following weeks unfolded like a quiet revolution in the Anderson household. Eleanor established a daily routine with Michael, carving out 3 hours each afternoon for their language sessions. She started with simple objects: cup, book, chair, window, teaching him their names in English, Spanish, Chinese, and occasionally Portuguese, a language she'd studied extensively during her academic career. James had rearranged his work schedule to be home earlier, often lingering in the doorway of Michael's room, watching in amazement as his son, silent for so many years, formed words in languages he himself couldn't understand. "How do you know all these languages?" he asked Elena one evening as she prepared dinner, Michael absorbed in drawing at the kitchen table. Elena tensed slightly, keeping her eyes on the vegetables she was chopping. "I had good teachers," she said vaguely. "Languages came naturally." "And to me." "It's remarkable," James persisted. "Most people struggle with just one foreign language. In my country, knowing multiple languages was necessary," she replied, carefully constructing a truth that revealed nothing of her former position as chair of the linguistics department at her country's most prestigious university. James seemed about to press further when Michael's voice interrupted them. "Ventana," the boy said, holding up a drawing of a window. "Window, Chuangu." James immediately shifted his attention to his son, his face lighting up with the wonder that had become familiar over the past weeks. "That's great, Mikey! 3 languages!" Elena breathed a silent sigh of relief at the diversion. The less James knew about her past, the safer she would be. By the end of the first month, Michael had expanded his vocabulary to over 50 words in 3 languages. More remarkably, he had begun to form simple sentences, stringing together nouns and verbs in hesitant but meaningful combinations. "I want water, please," he said one morning at breakfast, stunning his father into momentary silence before James scrambled to fill a glass. Elena observed that Michael seemed to find it easier to express certain emotions in specific languages. When frustrated, Spanish words tumbled out. When curious, he often defaulted to Chinese. English remained the language of everyday requests and observations. It was as if each language gave him access to different chambers of his mind. She recorded these patterns in a notebook she kept hidden beneath her mattress, alongside her true identity papers and the few photographs she'd managed to bring with her, remnants of a life violently interrupted. The breakthrough with Michael changed Elena's status in the household. Though still officially the housekeeper, her role had expanded to something between tutor and therapist. James insisted on increasing her salary, which she accepted gratefully, sending a portion back to her elderly parents who had escaped to a neighboring country after the threats began. But success brought its own complications. Dr. Sarah Winters, Michael's longtime therapist, arrived for her weekly session with the boy on a crisp October afternoon and found the dynamic irrevocably altered. "Michael, can we try the communication board today?" Dr. Winters asked, setting up the visual aid she'd been using unsuccessfully for years. Michael glanced at it disinterestedly. "No, thank you," he said clearly. "I can talk now." Dr. Winters shot a surprised look at Elena, who stood uncertainly by the door. "Yes, Mr. Anderson mentioned you've been making some progress," she said, her tone measured. "Why don't you show me what you've learned?" But Michael, who had been speaking freely with Elena minutes earlier, retreated into silence, turning away from the therapist's expectant gaze. "Michael," Dr. Winters tried again, "I'd like to hear your new words." Nothing. "Sometimes it takes time," Elena offered softly from the doorway. "He might not be ready to—" "Michael," Elena said, switching to Spanish, "¿Puedes mostrarle a la doctora como dices árbol?" Michael turned immediately. "Tree, árbol, shoe." He pointed to the illustration of a tree in one of his books. Dr. Winters' face tightened. "I see," she said coolly. "Mr. Anderson mentioned you've been teaching him multiple languages simultaneously." "It seems to help him," Elena explained. "Different languages offer different pathways for expression." "That's an unorthodox approach," Dr. Winters replied. "Typically, with nonverbal children on the spectrum, we focus on establishing fluency in their primary language before introducing complications." "It wasn't planned," Elena said. "It happened naturally when I recognized the Chinese characters he was drawing." Dr. Winters raised an eyebrow. "And you just happen to know Chinese, along with Spanish?" The suspicion in her tone made Elena's stomach clench. "I studied languages," she said simply. The remainder of the session passed awkwardly, with Michael responding only when Elena prompted him in Spanish or Chinese, steadfastly ignoring Dr. Winter's direct questions in English. When the therapist finally packed her materials, her expression was troubled. "Mr. Anderson," she said when James came to see her out, "I'd like to speak with you privately." Elena busied herself with Michael's snack in the kitchen, but she could hear fragments of their conversation from the front hall concerning level of attachment. Dr. Winters was saying, creating dependency, professional boundaries. "But he's speaking, Sarah," James responded, his voice rising slightly. "After 6 years of silence, doesn't that count for something?" "Of course it does," the therapist replied, lowering her voice. Elena strained to hear. "But we know nothing about her methods or qualifications, and this multilingual approach goes against established protocols for children with Michael's condition." "The established protocols weren't working," James said, firmly. "Elena's approach is." The conversation continued in hushed tones that Elena couldn't make out. When James returned to the kitchen, his expression was troubled. "Dr. Winters has concerns," he said without preamble. Elena nodded, keeping her eyes on the apple she was slicing for Michael. "I heard some of it. She thinks I should limit your involvement in Mikey's therapy." Elena set down the knife, her heart sinking. "I understand, I'm not a professional. I never claimed to be." "No," James said quickly. "I'm not going to do that. Whatever you're doing, it's working. But Sarah suggested bringing in a language specialist to evaluate your methods, maybe formalize them into a proper therapeutic approach." The idea of being evaluated by a professional sent a wave of panic through Eleanor. Such scrutiny could expose her background, her false identity, everything. "I don't think that's necessary," she said carefully. "What we're doing is very simple. It's just communication." "That's what I told her," James agreed. "But she's concerned about his apparent dependency on you. He'll speak for you, but not for her." "He just needs time," Eleanor insisted. "Trust is important for Michael." James studied her face, and Elena felt uncomfortably exposed under his gaze. "You seem to understand him so well," he said. "It's almost as if you've worked with children like him before." Elena turned away, busying herself with wiping down the counter. "I'm just paying attention to what works for him." Later that evening, after Michael had gone to bed, Elena found James in his home office, surrounded by reports and financial projections. He looked up when she knocked softly on the open door. "I wanted to apologize," she said, "for causing tension with Dr. Winters." James shook his head. "Don't apologize for helping my son find his voice. Still, I don't want to overstep." "Eleanor," he interrupted, setting down his papers. "Before you came, Mikey hadn't spoken a single word in 6 years. Not since Caroline left." He rarely mentioned his ex-wife. "Now he's speaking in 3 languages. Do you have any idea what that means to me?" Elena nodded, understanding all too well the value of having a voice when silence had been imposed. "Yesterday," James continued, his voice softening, "he asked me about stars. We sat on the porch and looked at the night sky, and he named the constellations in English and Spanish. It was the first real conversation I've had with my son since he was 4 years old." Elena felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "I'm glad," she managed. "Whatever Dr. Winters thinks about methodology, whatever concerns she has about professional boundaries, none of that matters compared to hearing my son's voice again." He looked directly at Elena. "So thank you. And please don't stop." That night, Eleanor lay awake in her small room, thinking about boundaries and trust. She'd crossed professional lines, certainly, but something more significant was happening. Michael was beginning to see her as more than a teacher or housekeeper. The way he looked at her, the way he sought her approval, it reminded her of the bond she'd once dreamed of having with a child of her own. And James, the way he'd looked at her tonight suggested his feelings were evolving too, moving beyond employer and employee into something more complicated, more dangerous. Elena turned, restlessly in her narrow bed. She couldn't afford complications or visibility. Her safety depended on remaining in the shadows, unnoticed and unmemorable. Yet Michael's breakthrough had thrust her into the spotlight within this small family universe, and she wasn't sure how to retreat without abandoning the boy who was finally finding his voice. The following morning, Michael surprised them both at breakfast by looking directly at Elena and saying in clear Spanish, "Mama, more toast, please." The word hung in the air between them. Mama. Not Elena, not Ms. Suarez, but Mama. James froze, coffee cup halfway to his lips. Elena felt heat rising to her face as she met his eyes across the table. "Michael," she said gently, switching to English. "I'm Elena, remember? Not Mama." "But..." Michael shook his head stubbornly. "Mama," he repeated, this time in Chinese, "wo de mama," my mother. And in that moment, as James set down his cup with a trembling hand, Elena realized that the fragile new world they were building together had just become infinitely more complicated and more precious. Richard Townsend considered himself a man of principle. As Chief Compliance Officer at Anderson Security Systems, he prided himself on maintaining order and adherence to regulations. His corner office on the 15th floor of a gleaming downtown Boston high-rise offered a commanding view of the harbor, a visual reminder of his position of authority. Today, however, his attention was focused not on the view but on the man seated across from him. James Anderson looked more relaxed than Richard had seen him in years, despite the pressure of their upcoming presentation to potential Japanese investors. "You seem different lately," Richard observed, leaning back in his ergonomic chair at tea. 51. Richard maintained the trim physique and military posture of his Navy days. More centered. James smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes, another rarity in recent years. "Things are improving at home. Mikey's making remarkable progress." "With that new therapist you mentioned?" "Not exactly a therapist," James clarified. "Eleanor, our housekeeper. Turns out she has quite a gift with languages. She's helped Mikey break through in a way none of the professionals ever did." Richard's eyebrows rose slightly. "Your housekeeper? That's unexpected. Life is full of surprises," James replied, shuffling through the presentation materials. "Mikey's speaking now, not just words but sentences, in 3 languages, no less." 3 languages? Richard couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. From a boy who was completely nonverbal for years? "I know it sounds incredible," James acknowledged. "To be honest, I'm still trying to understand it myself. But Elena has this method of associating objects with their names in multiple languages. Somehow it's unlocked something in Mikey's mind." Richard studied his friend and business partner carefully. "And this Elena? Where did you find her again?" "Agency placement," James said, distracted by his phone as a message came in. "Sorry. Speaking of Mikey, Eleanor's sending me updates throughout the day now." He smiled at the screen. He just learned the words for all the planets in 3 languages. Richard watched as James texted back, his face softening in a way that suggested more than just an employer's satisfaction with a domestic employee's performance. When James finally set the phone down, Richard decided to probe further. "This housekeeper seems quite educated for someone in domestic service," he observed casually. "Languages, astronomy, unusual skill set for cleaning houses." "Elena had a good education before coming to the States," James replied. "She doesn't talk much about her background, but it's obvious she's intelligent." "Where is she from?" James paused. "South America, I think. She speaks Spanish, but I've never asked specifically." Richard nodded slowly, filing away this information. "And how long has she been with you now?" "About 4 months. Why all the questions about my housekeeper, Richard?" Richard shrugged. "Just making conversation. It's not every day you hear about a domestic worker performing educational miracles." He glanced at his watch. "We should head to the conference room. The team will be assembling for the final prep." As they walked down the corridor, Richard casually added, "You should bring Mikey and this miracle worker to the company picnic next month. I'd love to meet them both." "I'll consider it," James said, his tone suggesting the opposite. Over the next week, Richard found himself increasingly preoccupied with James's domestic situation. It wasn't merely professional concern, though he told himself otherwise. Something about the story nagged at him. A housekeeper with extensive language skills, reluctant to discuss her background, transforming a non-verbal child into a polyglot seemingly overnight. It felt implausible at best, suspicious at worst. On Friday evening, he invited James for drinks at the Bristol Lounge, ostensibly to celebrate securing the Japanese investors. As they settled into the leather armchairs with their scotch, Richard steered the conversation back to domestic matters. "How's Mikey's progress coming along?" James's face lit up. "Remarkably well. He's starting to form complex sentences now, expressing thoughts and feelings he's never been able to articulate before." He took a sip of his drink. "Yesterday, he told me he remembers his mother leaving. All this time I thought he didn't understand what had happened, but he did. He just couldn't express it." "That must have been difficult to hear," Richard said, genuinely sympathetic. James had been devastated when Caroline walked out, leaving him with a non-verbal 4-year-old. "Actually, it was a relief," James admitted, finally knowing what's been in his mind all these years. He said, his voice caught slightly. He said he thought it was his fault because he didn't talk like other kids. Richard nodded solemnly. "And this breakthrough is all thanks to your housekeeper?" "Elena," James corrected. "And yes, her approach has been transformative. Even Dr. Winters is starting to acknowledge the progress, though she's still skeptical about the methods." "As she should be," Richard commented. "Professional skepticism is healthy when dealing with unorthodox approaches." James frowned slightly. "What exactly are you suggesting, Richard?" "Nothing at all," Richard backpedaled smoothly. "Just that unconventional methods should be subject to professional evaluation, especially when it comes to vulnerable children." He paused, then added casually, "Have you run a background check on her?" James set down his glass with more force than necessary. "She's my housekeeper, not a security risk. Everyone who comes into regular contact with a child should be vetted," Richard persisted. "It's just good practice." "Her references checked out," James said firmly. "The agency did their standard background verification." "Those agency checks are cursory at best," Richard scoffed. "They confirm identity documents and check for criminal records, but they don't dig deep. They wouldn't catch someone using false identification, for instance." James's expression hardened. "Why would Elena be using false identification?" Richard shrugged. "I'm not saying she is. I'm just pointing out that agency verifications have limitations." "This conversation is verging on offensive," James said, his voice tight. "Elena has been nothing but helpful and professional. Mikey is thriving under her care. That's all that matters to me." Richard raised his hands in a placating gesture. "You're right, I apologize. I'm being overprotective. It's an occupational hazard of working in security." He smiled conciliatorily. "Let me make it up to you. Bring Mikey and Elena to dinner at my place next weekend. Susan's been asking to see him, and I'd like to apologize to Elena in person for my unfounded suspicions." James hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "I'll ask her, but no promises. Elena's very private." "Of course," Richard agreed, signaling the waiter for another round. "No pressure at all." What James didn't know was that Richard had already begun his own investigation. The following Monday, while James was occupied with client meetings, Richard contacted a private investigator he sometimes used for corporate background checks. "I need information on an Elena Suarez," he told the investigator over a secure line. "Works as a housekeeper for James Anderson in Cambridge. Claims to be from South America. Speaks multiple languages, including Chinese. I want to know her real story." "Any particular reason for concern?" the investigator asked. Richard considered the question. Was there a legitimate reason beyond his own unease and perhaps a touch of jealousy at James's obvious admiration for this woman? He decided there was unusual level of influence over a vulnerable child, he said. Possible misrepresentation of qualifications. Could be nothing, but in my position, I can't ignore potential security risks to a key executive. "I'll look into it," the investigator promised. "Preliminary findings by the end of the week." Richard hung up, telling himself he was just being cautious, protecting both the company and his friend. If Elena Suarez was exactly who she claimed to be, no harm done. But if she wasn't, if she had secrets, Richard would be there to protect James from whatever consequences might follow. Meanwhile, Elena was experiencing her own moment of triumph. Michael had been invited to join his father in a meeting with the Japanese investors who had flown in for a final site visit. Initially intended as just a brief introduction, James proudly showing off his son's newfound communication skills, the encounter had evolved into something unexpected. One of the Japanese executives had greeted Michael in formal Japanese. To everyone's surprise, Michael had responded with a simple but accurate Japanese phrase Elena had taught him just a week earlier. The executives were delighted, and when the conversation turned technical, Michael began identifying terms on their presentation materials in multiple languages, drawing on the vocabulary Elena had been building with him. "Astonishing," the lead investor said to James. "Your son has a remarkable facility for languages. He correctly identified technical terms that our translators sometimes struggle with." James beamed with pride. "He's had an excellent teacher," he said, and for the first time in such a setting he added, "Perhaps you'd like to meet her. Elena has been instrumental in developing his language skills." Elena, who had been waiting in James's office as planned, was stunned when his assistant came to escort her to the conference room. Dressed in simple black pants and a blue blouse, her best outfit but hardly corporate attire, she entered the room feeling profoundly out of place. "Gentlemen, this is Elena Suarez," James introduced her. "She's been working with Michael on his language development." The Japanese executives bowed respectfully. One addressed her in Japanese, clearly expecting a response in kind. Elena, who knew only a few Japanese phrases, smiled apologetically and replied in English, explaining that Michael's progress in Japanese was a recent development. "But you speak Chinese?" another executive asked in Mandarin. "Yes," Elena replied in the same language, her perfect Beijing accent betraying years of study. Among other languages, the conversation that followed was a linguistic dance, with Elena moving smoothly between English, Mandarin, and occasionally Spanish when addressing Michael. The executives were visibly impressed, and by the end of the impromptu demonstration, the lead investor turned to James with a decisive nod. "We would be honored to partner with a company that values such diverse communication skills," he said. "The contract terms are acceptable. Let us proceed." Later, as they walked to the car, James was euphoric. "Do you have any idea what just happened in there?" he asked Elena. "That was a $50 million deal that's been hanging in the balance for months. Your work with Mikey just pushed it over the finish line." Elena smiled, genuinely pleased that Michael's progress had made such an impression, but also increasingly anxious about her growing visibility. "I'm glad I could help," she said quietly. "Help? Elena, you were brilliant." James looked at her with new eyes. "Your Mandarin is flawless. Where did you really learn to speak like that?" Before she could formulate a suitably vague response, Michael tugged at her hand. "Home now," he said in English, then Spanish, then Chinese, a pattern he often used for emphasis. "Yes, home now," she agreed, grateful for the interruption. But as they drove back to Cambridge, Elena felt James's curious glances. The protective anonymity she'd cultivated was eroding. Her exceptional abilities, once her greatest assets, now threatened to expose her. And somewhere in the background, she sensed a growing danger in the form of Richard Townsend, whose probing questions about her background had not gone unnoticed. That night, Elena dreamed of running through endless corridors, pursued by faceless authorities. She woke with a start at 3 a.m., her heart pounding, to find Michael standing beside her bed, his eyes solemn in the dim light filtering through the basement window. "Bad dream?" he asked in Spanish. Elena nodded, too startled to question how he had found his way to her room in the middle of the night. "Me too," he said, switching to English. "Can I stay with you?" She hesitated only briefly before lifting the covers. As Michael curled against her side, his breathing quickly steadying into sleep, Elena stared at the ceiling, wondering how much longer this fragile sanctuary would last. Before her past caught up with her, the dinner at Richard Townsend's elegant Beacon Hill townhouse started cordially enough. Susan Townsend, a gracious hostess with a genuine warmth that balanced her husband's formality, welcomed Elena with none of Richard's obvious suspicion. "I'm so pleased to finally meet you," Susan said, taking Elena's coat. Richard and James have talked about nothing but Michael's remarkable progress. Elena smiled politely, acutely aware of Richard's scrutinizing gaze. Michael deserves all the credit, he's an extraordinary child. As if on cue, Michael appeared beside her, impeccably dressed in a button-down shirt and pressed khakis. James's effort to make his son presentable for the formal dinner. Elena, he said, then corrected himself with the formality they'd practiced for the occasion. Ms. Suarez taught me how to count to 100 in 4 languages. Susan's eyes widened. 4? That's impressive. Which languages, Michael? English, Spanish, Chinese, and Portuguese, he answered promptly. Portuguese, Richard interjected, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. That's an interesting choice. Any particular reason? Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. It's similar to Spanish in many ways, she explained. It seemed a natural progression. Richard nodded. Slowly. And the Chinese? That seems less intuitive. Michael was already drawing Chinese characters when I arrived, Elena replied, sticking to the truth. He had a natural interest. Fascinating, Richard murmured. And where exactly did you learn Chinese, Miss Suarez? It's not commonly taught. In South American schools, is it? Before Eleanor could respond, James intervened. Richard, this isn't a job interview. Let's save the interrogation, shall we? Richard raised his hands in mock surrender. Just making conversation. I'm genuinely curious about Eleanor's educational background. It's not every day you meet a polyglot housekeeper. The tension in the room was palpable, but Susan smoothly redirected the conversation by asking Michael to show her some of the Chinese characters he had learned. As they moved to the dining room, James fell into step beside Elena. I'm sorry about Richard, he said quietly. He can be overly analytical. It's fine, Elena assured him, though it was anything but. Richard's probing questions confirmed her fears. He was suspicious and likely investigating her. Dinner proceeded with surface pleasantries, but Eleanor remained on edge, carefully measuring every word. When the conversation turned to current events in various parts of the world, she deliberately held back, pretending ignorance on topics she had once lectured about at university. After dessert, while Susan took Michael to see their garden fountain, Richard cornered Elena in the hallway outside the powder room. Ms. Suarez, he said, his voice low but intense, I want to be direct with you. I've noticed inconsistencies in your story. Elena kept her expression neutral. I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Townsend. Your accent, for instance. It's not consistent with someone from the region you claim to be from. His eyes hardened. And your knowledge of languages suggests formal education far beyond what you've acknowledged. I never claimed. You never claimed much of anything, Richard interrupted. That's precisely what concerns me. James and Michael have become attached to you. If you're not who you say you are, they deserve to know. Elena felt cold fear spreading through her chest, but years of hiding her emotions allowed her to maintain her composure. Mr. Townsend, I'm simply a housekeeper who happens to know languages. My past is my own, but I assure you, I mean no harm to the Andersons. Richard studied her face intently. For their sake, I hope that's true, but you should know, I will find out who you really are. And if I discover anything that could hurt them, I won't hesitate to act. The threat hung in the air between them. Elena nodded once, then slipped past him back to the dining room, her mind racing with contingency plans she had hoped never to need. The drive home was quiet, Michael dozing in the back seat while James navigated the empty late-night streets. Elena stared out the window, calculating how quickly she could pack her few belongings and disappear if necessary. Richard was out of line tonight, James said suddenly, breaking the silence. I apologize for him. Elena turned from the window. You've known him a long time? Since college. We founded the company together. James sighed. He's always been cautious, sometimes to the point of paranoia. It's what makes him excellent. At security work, but difficult at dinner parties. He cares about you and Michael, Elena offered diplomatically. He's protective. James glanced at her. Is there something you want to tell me, Elena? Something about your background that might explain his concerns? The question hung in the air, an opportunity for honesty that tempted her. But the habits of self-preservation ran too deep. "I'm a private person, Mr. Anderson," she said finally. "My life before coming here, it wasn't easy. But nothing in my past poses any danger to you or Michael." James nodded, seeming to accept this partial truth. "I respect your privacy, but I want you to know, whatever you're running from, you're safe with us." The irony of his assurance wasn't lost on Elena. Safety was an illusion, one that could shatter at any moment. And now, with Richard actively investigating her, the clock was ticking. 2 days later, Eleanor was helping Michael with a new set of vocabulary words when she heard James's car in the driveway. It was barely noon, hours before he normally returned from work. He entered Michael's room with an expression Eleanor couldn't read, a mixture of concern, confusion, and something else. Something that made her stomach clench with apprehension. "Mikey, can you practice on your own for a bit?" James asked. "I need to talk with Elena downstairs." Michael nodded, already absorbed in his writing practice. Elena followed James to his home office, her mind cycling through possible scenarios, none of them good. James closed the door behind them and gestured for her to sit. Instead of taking his seat behind the desk, he perched on its edge, facing her directly. "I received an interesting call today," he began, his voice carefully neutral, "from the head of linguistics at Harvard. Apparently, one of their doctoral students attended a conference in South America 3 years ago and is convinced they saw you there, not as an attendee, but as a keynote speaker." He paused, watching her reaction. "They said you were introduced as Dr. Elena Reyes, Chair of Linguistics at Universidad Nacional." Elena's carefully constructed world tilted beneath her. She had given her real first name, but changed her surname from Reyes to Suarez, a common enough Hispanic name that she thought would attract less attention. A simple change, but one that had now unraveled her disguise. "The doctoral student," James continued, "was quite insistent. Said your presentation on language acquisition in neurodivergent children was groundbreaking." Another pause. "Is it true, Eleanor? Are you Dr. Reyes?" The moment stretched between them. Eleanor considered denial, considered making up yet another story. But she was tired of lying, tired of hiding, and somehow, despite all reason, she found herself wanting James to know the truth. "Yes," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was Dr. Elena Reyes, in another life." James nodded slowly, as if confirming a suspicion rather than learning a revelation. "What happened? How does a distinguished linguistics professor end up working as a housekeeper under a false name?" Elena took a deep breath. The story she had kept locked inside for so long finally spilled out. "My husband was a journalist," she began. "Fernando investigated corruption, government ties to criminal enterprises. His last investigation implicated powerful people. They silenced him." She swallowed hard. "Then they came for me." "Because you knew what he was investigating?" James asked softly. Elena shook her head. "Because I refused to be silent, I gave interviews, named names, continued his work. Then the threats started. My office was vandalized. My parents' home was broken into." Her voice caught. "One night I received an envelope with photographs of me, walking to class, shopping at my parents' home. The message was clear. I either disappeared on my own, or they would make me disappear." James's face had paled. "My God, Elena. I arranged false papers, crossed borders at night. My parents fled to a different country. I made my way here where no one would look for a prestigious professor." A bitter smile crossed her face. "The transition from academic to domestic worker was educational. And all this time with Mikey, you've been using your professional knowledge, haven't you? This wasn't just a housekeeper who happened to know languages." Elena nodded. "My specialty was language acquisition in children with neurological differences. Michael's case..." She stopped, realizing how clinical that sounded. "Michael reminded me of the children I worked with. When I saw those Chinese characters, I recognized a mind trying to find pathways to communication." James stood and paced the length of the office. "You're telling me that by sheer coincidence, my non-verbal autistic son ended up with a world expert in exactly his condition as a housekeeper. Put that way, it did sound implausible. The universe has strange symmetries, Elena offered quietly. James stopped pacing and faced her. Or perhaps it wasn't coincidence at all. The agency that placed you, did you specifically seek out a position with a special needs child? Elena hesitated, then nodded. After months of cleaning offices at night and elderly care during days, I saw the posting. Single father seeks housekeeper, child with special needs. I thought perhaps I could help, even in some small way. Use what I know without revealing who I am. And you have helped, James's voice softened. More than helped, you've transformed his life, our lives. A tense silence filled the room. Eleanor waited for what would come next. Dismissal perhaps, or worse, a threat to report her false identity to authorities. Instead, James crossed the room and knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. Eleanor, Dr. Reyes, whatever name you choose, I don't care about your past. I care about what you've done for my son. You've given him his voice. You've given me back my child. Tears welled in Elena's eyes. My false papers won't stand up to serious scrutiny. If Richard continues investigating, I'll handle Richard, James interrupted. He works for me, not the other way around. It's not that simple, Elena insisted. My presence here puts you at risk. If immigration authorities discover I'm here illegally, then we'll find a way to make it legal, James said firmly. There are paths to legitimate status. Asylum, specialized work visas for those with extraordinary abilities, which you clearly have. The hope in his voice made Elena's chest ache. James, I've been living in shadows for so long. I don't know if I can step into the light again. You already have, he said gently. Every day with Mikey, you've been reclaiming pieces of your true self, the professor, the expert, the woman who refuses to be silenced. A soft knock interrupted them. The door cracked open and Michael peered in, his expression concerned. Elena sad? He asked, his intuition cutting through the adult complexities. No, Carino, Elena assured him, quickly wiping her eyes. Just talking about important things with your father. Michael came fully into the room, moving directly to Elena's side. No more sad, he said firmly, placing his small hand on her cheek. Then, to her surprise, he turned to his father and added in perfect Spanish, She stays with us, right, Papa? James looked from his son to Elena, a mixture of wonder and determination in his eyes. Yes, Mikey, if she wants to, Elena stays with us. The three of them sat together in the quiet office, a fragile new understanding forming between them. Elena knew that danger still lurked, from Richard's investigation, from immigration authorities, from the ghosts of her past. But for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something dangerously close to hope. Later that evening, as Michael slept and the house settled into nighttime silence, James joined Elena on the back porch. They sat side by side on the wooden swing, watching fireflies illuminate the garden in flashes of gold. What will you do? Elena asked quietly. James considered before answering. First, I'll talk to Richard, appeal to his better nature. And, if that fails, then I'll remind him where his loyalties should lie. His voice hardened slightly. And I'll consult my attorneys about your options for legal status. Elena turned to face him. Why would you do all this for me? Risk your reputation, your business relationships? James met her gaze steadily. Because Mikey needs you. Because you've brought light back into our home. He paused, then added more softly. And because I think I might need you too. The admission hung between them, delicate and new. Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. A wall beginning to crumble, a door slowly opening. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. I've spent so long looking over my shoulder, I've forgotten how to look forward. James's hand found hers in the darkness. Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time. As their fingers intertwined, the porch swing gently rocking beneath them, Eleanor allowed herself to imagine a future where she could reclaim her name, her work, her voice, and perhaps find a new home in the process. Patricia Cunningham prided herself on keeping the most beautiful garden on Brattle Street. At 63, the retired librarian devoted her considerable energy to maintaining her pristine Victorian home and observing with equal attention to detail the comings and goings of her neighbors. From behind her lace curtains, little escaped Patricia's notice. Lately, her attention had fixed on the Anderson household across the street. James Anderson had always been a polite, if reserved, neighbor, raising his unusual son with quiet dignity after his wife's abandonment. Patricia had felt sorry for them both. The handsome widower, she preferred to think of him as widowed rather than divorced, and his silent, strange child. But changes had been occurring over the past months. The boy was speaking now. She'd heard him clearly while pruning her hydrangeas. And the Latin American housekeeper James had hired was clearly becoming more than an employee. Patricia had seen them through her kitchen window one evening, sitting together on the back porch swing, their profiles illuminated by porch lights, heads tilted toward each other in unmistakable intimacy. Completely inappropriate, Patricia muttered to herself as she positioned her bird-watching binoculars for a better view of the Anderson driveway. The woman was arriving home with the boy, helping him from the car with a familiarity that grated on Patricia's sense of propriety. The boy hugged the woman, actually hugged her, before they disappeared into the house together. Patricia's phone, harassing, interrupting her surveillance. It was Margaret from her garden club, eager to discuss the upcoming autumn planting. "You won't believe what's happening across the street," Patricia interjected after minimal pleasantries. "The Anderson man is carrying on with his housekeeper, right in front of his impressionable son." "James Anderson?" Margaret sounded surprised. "He's always seemed so proper." "Well, people aren't always what they seem," Patricia sniffed. "This woman has practically taken over, acting like she's the mother of that boy." "Well, the poor child never had much maternal influence," Margaret pointed out reasonably. "Maybe it's good for him to have a woman's presence." "She's using the boy to get to the father," Patricia insisted. "You should see how she's worked her way in. And I have my doubts about her legal status, if you know what I mean. These people often come with questionable papers." "These people?" Margaret's voice cooled slightly. "Patricia, that sounds rather—" "I'm simply concerned for the neighborhood," Patricia cut in defensively. "Property values depend on maintaining certain standards." After ending the call, Patricia returned to her window, her indignation simmering. She'd lived on Brattle Street for 40 years, through neighborhood transitions and gentrification. The thought of her carefully preserved street being altered by unsuitable elements disturbed her deeply. The final straw came 3 days later. Patricia was trimming her front hedges when she witnessed a scene that confirmed her worst suspicions. The housekeeper and the boy were returning from what appeared to be a park outing. James Anderson pulled into the driveway moments later, stepping out of his car with a smile that transformed his usually serious face. The boy ran to him, chattering excitedly in what sounded like a foreign language. Then, Patricia nearly dropped her shears. James embraced the housekeeper, pulling her close in a decidedly unemployer-like manner, right there on the front lawn for anyone to see. That evening, after several hours of righteous contemplation, Patricia made a decision. She located the website for immigration and customs enforcement and navigated to their anonymous tip line. With thin lips and unwavering conviction, she completed the online form, reporting a suspected undocumented immigrant working illegally as a domestic employee. She included the Anderson address, a physical description of Elena, and her suspicions about false documentation. "There," she said aloud as she clicked submit. "Some things simply aren't right." She closed her laptop with a satisfied snap, convinced she had performed her civic duty. The neighborhood would thank her, even if they never knew what she had done. 3 weeks passed. Patricia had almost forgotten her report when she observed unusual activity at the Anderson house. A nondescript car parked across the street, and 2 official-looking individuals approached the front door. From her strategic position at her living room window, Patricia watched the scene unfold like a television drama. The officials spoke briefly with James at the door, then entered the house. 20 minutes later, they emerged with the housekeeper between them. Even from a distance, Patricia could see the woman's pale face and rigid posture. James followed, his expression thunderous, the boy clinging to his hand and looking confused. "Well," Patricia murmured, "the system works after all." She expected to feel vindicated. Instead, an uncomfortable sensation nagged at her as she watched the boy break away from his father and run to the woman, wrapping his arms around her waist and burying his face against her. The woman knelt, holding the child close, speaking urgently into his ear. James stood nearby, his hand on his son's shoulder, his face a mask of controlled fury as he spoke to one of the officials. Patricia stepped back from the window, suddenly reluctant to witness the scene's conclusion. She busied herself with household tasks, determinedly ignoring the activity across the street. By evening, when she allowed herself another glance, the official car was gone. The Anderson house stood quiet, lights glowing behind drawn curtains. "It's for the best," Patricia told herself firmly. "Rules exist for a reason." But that night, she slept poorly, troubled by dreams of weeping children and accusing eyes. Inside the Anderson home, the atmosphere was one of controlled crisis. Elena sat at the kitchen table, the official deportation notice spread before her, its government letterhead and formal language declaring in sterile terms that her presence in the country was unlawful and she had 14 days to depart voluntarily or face forcible removal. James paced the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear as he spoke urgently with his attorney. Michael sat beside Elena, his small hand placed protectively over hers, his eyes never leaving her face. "They can't take you," he said in Spanish, his voice trembling but determined. "You're my mother now." Elena's heart clenched. "Michael," she replied gently in the same language, "I will always be with you in spirit no matter what happens." "No," he insisted, switching to English. "Dad will fix it. He fixes everything." James ended his call and sat heavily at the table. "Lawrence is coming over tomorrow morning. He's bringing an immigration specialist." He reached for Eleanor's free hand. "We're going to fight this." "James," she said quietly, "you need to prepare Michael for the possibility that I might have to leave." "That's not happening," James stated flatly. "We have options." "What options?" Eleanor asked. "My papers won't stand up to serious investigation once they dig deeper and discover my true identity." "That's exactly what we use," James interrupted. "Your real identity is Dr. Elena Reyes, a renowned linguistics expert facing persecution in your home country. We file for asylum, for a specialized work visa. Those processes take months, even years," Elena pointed out. "This notice gives me 14 days. "We'll get an emergency stay," James insisted. "Lawrence says there are humanitarian provisions for cases like yours." Michael, following the conversation closely, squeezed Elena's hand. "Tell them I need you," he said simply. "Tell them I can't talk without you." The pure emotional logic of the child's statement hung in the air between them. Elena felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "Oh, cariño," she whispered. "You have your voice now. No one can take that away." "But I don't want to use it without you," he replied, his face crumpling. James pulled his son onto his lap, holding him close. "We're going to do everything possible to keep Elena with us," he promised. "Everything." Over the next days, the Anderson home transformed into a legal war room. Lawrence Friedman, James's longtime attorney, arrived with Emma Chen, an immigration specialist whose reputation for handling complex cases preceded her. The dining room table disappeared under stacks of legal documents, precedent cases, and immigration forms. "The asylum claim is our strongest angle," Emma explained, pushing her dark-rimmed glasses up her nose. "Dr. Reyes can demonstrate credible fear of persecution based on her political opinions and her husband's work. The challenge will be explaining the false documentation." "I did what I had to do to survive," Elena said quietly. Emma nodded. "Many asylum seekers do. It complicates the case but doesn't disqualify you. We'll file for an emergency stay of removal while we prepare the full asylum application." James, who had been reviewing a document, looked up sharply. "What about this?" "The O1 visa for individuals with extraordinary abilities," Emma considered. It's a possibility. Dr. Reyes certainly qualifies based on her academic achievements, but it requires extensive documentation, letters from peers, evidence of continued work in the field. I can get all of that, James said firmly. I've already contacted the linguistics department at Harvard. The department chair remembers Elena's work and is willing to support her application. It's a two-pronged approach then, Lawrence concluded. Asylum claim with the emergency stay and simultaneously pursue the O1 visa. As the attorneys worked, Eleanor focused on maintaining normalcy for Michael. She continued their language sessions, though now they were tinged with a desperate quality, as if she were trying to pour all her knowledge into him before time ran out. One evening, after Michael had gone to bed, Elena found James in his office, surrounded by printouts of her academic papers and letters of support from colleagues around the world. His eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, but he looked up with a fierce determination when she entered. The Harvard Linguistics Department has offered you a research position, he announced, contingent on resolving your immigration status, of course, but it strengthens the O1 application enormously. Elena sat across from him, overwhelmed by his efforts. James, you've moved mountains in just a few days. I'd move the entire planet if that's what it took, he replied, the intensity in his voice making her breath catch. Why? She asked softly. Why risk so much for me? James set down his papers and looked at her directly. Because in just a few months you've brought my son back to life. Because you've brought me back to life too. He came around the desk and knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. I've lived in a kind of suspension since Caroline left, functioning but not really living. Then you arrived, and suddenly there was color again, sound again. He squeezed her hands. I can't lose that, I won't. Elena felt tears spill onto her cheeks. I'm afraid, she admitted. Afraid to hope. Afraid to imagine a future here. Then I'll hope for both of us, James said, reaching up to brush away her tears. And I'll fight for both of us too. The moment hung between them, intimate and charged with unspoken feelings. Then, with gentle deliberation, James leaned forward and kissed her. It was a tender kiss, questioning at first, then deepening as Elena responded, allowing herself this moment of connection despite all the uncertainty surrounding them. When they finally drew apart, James rested his forehead against hers. We're going to win this, he whispered. I promise you. Eleanor wanted desperately to believe him, but as she returned to her room later that night, the deportation notice still sat on her nightstand, its cold official language a reminder that promises, however heartfelt, might not be enough against the machinery of immigration enforcement. She was carefully placing a few precious items into a small bag, preparations for the worst-case scenario, when a soft knock sounded at her door. Michael stood there in his pajamas, clutching his favorite book. Couldn't sleep, he explained. Can you read to me? Elena welcomed him in, setting aside her packing. They settled on her bed, the book open between them. But instead of asking her to read, Michael began speaking, his voice soft but clear. If they try to take you away, he said, I won't let them. I'll tell them they can't separate us. Elena's heart broke a little at his childish determination. Michael, sometimes, even when people love each other very much, they have to be apart for a while. He shook his head stubbornly. No, we're family now, you, me, and Dad. The simplicity of his declaration brought fresh tears to Elena's eyes. Oh, Carino. Dad says we're going to court soon, Michael continued. He says I can talk to the judge. Elena tensed. Your father wants you to testify? Michael nodded. I want to. I want to tell them how you gave me words when I didn't have any. The thought of Michael in a courtroom, facing immigration officials and a judge, filled Elena with both dread and a fierce pride. That would be very brave, she said carefully, but also very difficult. I'm not scared, he declared with the absolute confidence of childhood. I know what to say. He looked up at her, his eyes serious. I'll say, please don't take my mother away. Mother. The word echoed in Elena's heart, filling empty spaces she hadn't realized existed. She pulled Michael close, resting her cheek against his hair. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "never forget that you have a voice now. Use it. Speak your truth. That's the greatest gift you could give me." Outside, the autumn wind rustled through the trees, carrying away the last of the season's leaves. 14 days suddenly seemed like no time at all. Eleanor held Michael until he fell asleep, then gently tucked him into her bed, unwilling to wake him for the journey back to his own room. She moved to the window, looking out at the quiet street, at the darkened houses where families slept securely, in the knowledge that tomorrow would be much like today. How she envied them that certainty. Across the street, a light still burned in Patricia Cunningham's front window. Elena had noticed the older woman watching their house, had felt her disapproving gaze. She wondered if Patricia knew what she had set in motion with her anonymous report, what pain she had caused a child who had already experienced too much loss. With a sigh, Eleanor turned from the window. The legal battle ahead would be difficult, perhaps impossible. But for Michael's sake, and yes, for James's and for her own, she would fight with everything she had. The shadows had claimed too much of her life already. It was time, at last, to step into the light. The John Joseph Moakley Federal Courthouse stood imposingly on the Boston waterfront, its modern glass facade reflecting the harbor waters. Inside courtroom 3, Elena sat beside Emma Chen, her immigration attorney, as they waited for the preliminary hearing to begin. Behind them sat James, Michael, and Lawrence Friedman. The opposite table was occupied by Kevin Harrington, the Department of Homeland Security attorney handling the government's case. "Remember," Emma whispered, "Judge Martinez has a reputation for fairness, but strict adherence to the law. We're only asking for a temporary stay today, while we prepare the full asylum case." Elena nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. She wore a simple navy blue dress that James had insisted on purchasing for her. "You're a distinguished professor, not a housekeeper, and the judge needs to see that." When Judge Eleanor Martinez entered, the courtroom rose. In her late 50s, with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a severe bun, the judge carried herself with an air of no-nonsense efficiency. She adjusted her glasses and reviewed the documents before her. "Case number 87542, in the matter of Elena Reyes, also known as Elena Suarez," she announced. "This is a hearing on a motion for emergency stay of removal pending asylum proceedings." She looked up. "Ms. Chen, you may proceed." Emma rose. "Your Honor, Dr. Elena Reyes is a distinguished linguistics professor who fled her home country after receiving explicit threats to her safety following her husband's journalistic exposés of government corruption. She seeks asylum based on well-founded fear of persecution for her political opinions and association." "Mr. Harrington," the judge prompted. The government attorney stood, his tall frame imposing in a perfectly tailored suit. "Your Honor, while the respondent's background may indeed be as described, the fact remains that she entered the country under false pretenses with fraudulent documentation. She has been living and working illegally for nearly a year. These actions demonstrate a disregard for our immigration laws that cannot be overlooked." The judge nodded. "Ms. Chen, how do you respond to the issue of the fraudulent documentation?" "Your Honor," Emma replied, "Dr. Reyes was fleeing for her life. Her husband had been killed for his work exposing corruption. She received photographs of herself being surveilled, along with explicit threats. Under such extraordinary circumstances, she had no choice but to utilize whatever means necessary to reach safety. The proper course would have been to present herself at a port of entry and request asylum immediately," Harrington countered. "With respect," Emma responded, "that assumes knowledge of U.S. immigration procedures that many asylum seekers simply don't possess, especially those fleeing in fear for their lives." The legal arguments continued, with both attorneys citing precedents and regulations. Elena found herself drifting, focusing instead on the feel of the courtroom, the polished wood, the subtle scents of cologne and coffee, the soft rustle of papers. Behind her, she could sense Michael's presence, his extraordinary focus as he absorbed every word. Judge Martinez's voice brought her attention back. "Dr. Reyes, please stand." Eleanor rose on unsteady legs. "I'd like to hear from you directly," the judge said, her expression unreadable. "Why should I grant this emergency stay?" Elena took a deep breath. "Your Honor, I understand that I broke the law by entering this country with false documents. I'm not proud of that, but I was desperate. In my country, I watched my husband die for speaking truth. When they came for me next, I had a choice: flee or face the same fate." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Since coming to America, I've tried to build a quiet, productive life. I never expected to find myself in a position where my academic background would be useful again, but fate placed me in the Anderson home with a remarkable child who needed exactly the expertise I spent my career developing." "The child mentioned in these affidavits?" the judge asked, indicating a stack of documents. "Yes, Your Honor. Michael Anderson. A brilliant boy with autism who had been nonverbal for 6 years. Through specialized language techniques, I've been able to help him break through his silence. He now speaks 3 languages fluently." Harrington rose. "Your Honor, while this is a touching story, it has no bearing on the legal issues at hand. The respondent's relationship with this child, however beneficial, does not negate her violation of immigration law." "On the contrary," Emma interjected, "it speaks directly to the humanitarian considerations this court is obligated to weigh. The extraordinary hardship that would result from Dr. Reyes's deportation extends beyond her personal circumstances to include the welfare of a vulnerable American child." Judge Martinez considered this, then turned her attention to the back of the courtroom. "I see the child in question is present. Mr. Anderson, is that your son?" James stood. "Yes, Your Honor. Michael is my son." "And would you like to make a statement regarding this matter?" "If the court permits, Your Honor, Michael himself would like to speak." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Martinez raised an eyebrow. "The child wishes to address the court." "Yes, Your Honor," James confirmed. "He's prepared a statement." The judge seemed to hesitate, then nodded. "Given the unusual circumstances, I'll allow it. Please bring him forward." Elena turned to watch as James guided Michael to the center of the courtroom. At 10 years old, Michael looked small before the imposing bench, but his posture was determined, his gaze steady as he looked up at the judge. "Hello, Michael," Judge Martinez said, her tone gentler than it had been throughout the proceedings. "I understand you want to tell me something." Michael nodded solemnly. "Yes, Your Honor." His voice was clear, carrying through the silent courtroom. "I want to tell you about how Eleanor gave me my words back." The judge leaned forward slightly. "I'm listening." "I was quiet for a long time," Michael began. "The words were inside me, but I couldn't get them out. It was like being locked in a room with no doors." He spoke carefully, each word deliberately chosen. "Eleanor found a key. She showed me that there are many ways to say the same thing. In English, in Spanish, in Chinese, each language was like a different key, opening different doors in my mind." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper, carefully opening it to reveal Chinese characters, written in a child's careful hand. "This means freedom," he said, pointing to a character. "Ziyu in Chinese, libertad in Spanish. 3 different keys to the same door." Elena felt tears threatening as Michael continued, his voice growing more confident. "Before Eleanor, I was alone in my head. Now I can talk to my dad. I can tell him when I'm happy or scared or confused. I can read books and tell stories and ask questions." He looked back at Elena, then returned his gaze to the judge. "If you take Elena away, part of my voice goes away too." Judge Martinez's expression remained neutral, but her eyes had softened. "Thank you for sharing that with us, Michael. Is there anything else you'd like to say?" Michael nodded, his face suddenly solemn. "Just one more thing." He took a deep breath and then, to everyone's surprise, began speaking in fluent Spanish. "Por favor, no se lleven a mi madre. La necesito." Then he switched to Chinese, the tonal language flowing naturally from his young voice. "Ching buyao, daisu vo de mama, wo suyauta." Finally, he returned to English, his eyes never leaving the judge's face. "Please don't take my mother away. I need her." The courtroom fell absolutely silent. Even Harrington seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Judge Martinez removed her glasses, polishing them thoughtfully before replacing them. "Thank you, Michael," she said quietly. "You may return to your seat now." As James led Michael back to the gallery, the judge shuffled her papers, appearing to collect her thoughts. When she looked up, her expression was once again professionally neutral. "Mr. Harrington, your response." The government attorney cleared his throat. "And while the child's testimony is certainly moving, Your Honor, it does not change the fundamental legal issues. Ms. Reyes, or Dr. Reyes if you prefer, violated immigration law. The fact that she has formed an attachment to this child in the meantime cannot be the basis for suspending those laws." "Ms. Chen," the judge prompted. "Your Honor," Emma began, "what we've witnessed today goes beyond mere attachment. Dr. Reyes has provided specialized therapeutic intervention that has transformed this child's life, intervention that only someone with her unique expertise could provide. This case exemplifies the humanitarian considerations that our immigration laws explicitly recognize as grounds for relief." Judge Martinez nodded slowly. "I'll take a 15-minute recess to consider my ruling." As the judge exited the courtroom, Elena turned to find James and Michael in the row behind her. Michael immediately came to her side, slipping his small hand into hers. "You did wonderfully," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "Was it enough?" he asked, his eyes wide with the weight of adult concerns no child should have to bear. "I don't know, Carino," she answered honestly, "but I am so proud of you, so very proud." James joined them, placing a supportive hand on Elena's shoulder. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "we face it together." The 15 minutes stretched interminably. Elena watched the courtroom clock, each tick seeming to take an eternity. Around them, a few curious observers whispered amongst themselves, occasionally glancing in their direction. Emma and Lawrence huddled in intense discussion, reviewing options should the ruling go against them. Finally, the bailiff announced the judge's return. Everyone rose as Judge Martinez resumed her seat, her expression giving nothing away. "I've considered the arguments presented today," she began. "This case presents complex legal and humanitarian issues. On one hand, we have clear violations of immigration law. On the other, we have compelling humanitarian concerns involving the welfare of a child with special needs." She adjusted her glasses. "The purpose of today's hearing is not to make a final determination on Dr. Reyes's asylum claim, but rather to decide whether deportation should be stayed pending that determination. After careful consideration, I find that the balance of equities in this case favors granting the emergency stay." Elena felt her knees weaken with relief. Beside her, Emma squeezed her arm in quiet celebration. "However," the judge continued, "this stay is conditional. Dr. Reyes must remain at her current address, report weekly to immigration authorities, and proceed expeditiously with her formal asylum application. Furthermore, I am ordering an evaluation by an independent child psychologist to assess the therapeutic relationship between Dr. Reyes and the Anderson child." She fixed Elena with a direct gaze. "To be absolutely clear, this ruling is not a determination on your ultimate right to remain in the United States. It is simply an acknowledgement that the humanitarian considerations in this case warrant a full and proper hearing on the merits of your asylum claim." With a tap of her gavel, Judge Martinez concluded the hearing. "We're adjourned." The courtroom erupted in hushed conversations. Emma turned to Elena with a relieved smile. "This is good, very good. The stay gives us time to build a comprehensive asylum case, and Judge Martinez clearly was moved by Michael's testimony." Elena nodded, still, processing the reprieve she'd been granted. Behind her, Michael tugged at her hand. When she turned, he was beaming. "See?" he said simply. "I told you we'd win." James embraced them both, his relief palpable. "This is just the beginning," he whispered against Elena's hair. "But it's a good beginning." As they gathered their belongings, Elena noticed Kevin Harrington approaching. The government attorney stopped before them, his expression professional but not unkind. "Dr. Reyes," he said formally, While I'll continue to represent the government's interests in this matter, I want you to know that I was impressed by your young advocate. He glanced at Michael. Not many children his age could address a federal court with such composure, especially in multiple languages. "Thank you," Elena replied cautiously. Harrington nodded once, then added in a lower voice, "The government's position isn't personal. I hope you understand that." "I do," Eleanor assured him. "You're doing your job, as I once did mine." As they left the courthouse, a small group had gathered on the steps outside. To Elena's surprise, they were holding signs, "Let Dr. Reyes stay" and "Languages of Love know no borders." A woman stepped forward, introducing herself as the parent of a child with autism. "We've heard about your work with Michael," she explained. "The special education community is small, and word travels fast. We wanted to show our support." Overwhelmed, Elena could only nod her thanks as they made their way to James's car. The autumn sun was setting over Boston Harbor, casting long golden shadows across the courthouse steps. As they drove home, Michael fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the emotional day. "He was magnificent," James said softly, glancing at his son in the rearview mirror. "I never imagined he could speak so eloquently in public." "You've raised an extraordinary child," Eleanor replied, "long before I came along." James reached across the console to take her hand. "We're going to win this, Elena." Today was just the first step. Elena wanted to believe him. The stay of deportation had given her breathing room, a chance to build her case properly. But she'd lived with uncertainty too long to embrace hope fully. "Even if we win the asylum case," she said quietly, "there will always be those who believe I don't belong here. People like your colleague Richard, or that neighbor who reported me." "They don't matter," James insisted. "What matters is that you've found a place where you can use your gifts, where you're needed and valued, where you're loved." The word hung in the air between them, neither bold declaration nor casual slip. Something in between, a truth emerging into the open after long concealment. Elena tightened her grip on his hand, allowing herself, just for this moment, to imagine her future where she could reclaim not only her professional identity, but also the personal connections she'd sacrificed in her flight from danger. As they pulled into the driveway of the house that had become her sanctuary, Eleanor felt a curious sensation, like stepping across a threshold from perpetual flight into the possibility of home. The fight was far from over. The asylum case would be scrutinized, her past examined, her fears tested for credibility. There would be more hearings, more legal arguments, more uncertainty. But for tonight at least, she could breathe freely, knowing that tomorrow would find her still here, still teaching Michael, still building this fragile new life word by word, day by day. In the back seat, Michael stirred, opening sleepy eyes, as the car stopped. "Are we home?" he asked. "Yes, Carino," Elena answered. "We're home." The simple exchange contained multitudes. In those few words, home, we together, lay the promise of everything Elena had thought forever lost. As they walked into the house, Michael between them, holding both their hands, Elena allowed herself to believe, just a little, in the power of new beginnings. 8 years later. The International Conference on Language and Neurodiversity at MIT's Kresge Auditorium was filled to capacity. Academics, therapists, educators, and parents had gathered from around the world for the groundbreaking event. In the front row, Eleanor Reyes Anderson sat beside her husband, James, both watching with unmistakable pride as the young man at the podium adjusted his microphone. At 18, Michael Anderson had grown tall and confident, his once hesitant speech now flowing with eloquence as he addressed the assembled crowd in perfect English. "Language saved my life," he began, his voice strong and clear. Or more accurately, languages saved my life. 8 years ago, I was a child locked in silence, unable to express the thoughts and feelings trapped inside me. Today I stand before you as living proof that the pathways to communication are as diverse as humanity itself. Eleanor squeezed James's hand, remembering the long journey that had brought them to this moment. The asylum case had been arduous, stretching over 18 months of hearings, evaluations, and legal arguments. Richard Townsend had testified against her, claiming security concerns about her presence in James's household. But he'd been countered by an impressive array of character witnesses: Michael's doctors, Elena's former academic colleagues, even Dr. Winters, who would eventually become an ally after seeing Michael's extraordinary progress. The turning point had come when the Harvard Linguistics Department had not only offered Elena a research position, but had created an entire program around her methods for teaching language to neurodivergent children. The O1 visa for individuals with extraordinary abilities had been granted first, providing a legal pathway while the asylum case continued. Eventually, Judge Martinez had granted asylum, acknowledging the legitimate fears that had driven Eleanor from her home country. On the stand beside Michael sat a stack of books, his first published work, The Language Bridges, which detailed the multilingual approach that had transformed his life. At 18, he was already a recognized voice in the field of language acquisition for children with autism, his personal journey lending authenticity to his academic observations. In neurotypical development, Michael continued, switching smoothly to Mandarin Chinese, then back to English for the translation, language follows predictable pathways. But for those of us with neurological differences, those pathways may be blocked or diverted. What my mother discovered was that when one linguistic road is impassable, another might be wide open. The casual reference to my mother made Elena's heart swell. The adoption had been finalized 3 years ago, shortly after she and James married, a legal recognition of the bond that had formed naturally between them. Michael had insisted on it, even though he was already 15 at the time, old enough that many would have considered formal adoption unnecessary. "I want it on paper," he had declared. "I want everyone to know we chose each other." Now, watching him command the attention of experts from around the world, Eleanor marveled at how far they had come from those tense days of hiding and fear. "The methodology we've developed," Michael was saying, "isn't about forcing neurodivergent children to communicate in neurotypical ways. It's about finding the unique linguistic keys that unlock each child's natural modes of expression." He clicked to the next slide, showing brain scans with highlighted activity patterns. Recent research from our laboratory at Harvard demonstrates that multilingual exposure activates neural pathways that remain dormant in traditional single-language therapeutic approaches for children with autism. James leaned close to whisper in Elena's ear, "He sounds just like you when you're giving lectures. Same intonation pattern." Elena smiled, recognizing the truth in his observation. Over the years, Michael had absorbed not just languages, but mannerisms, scholarly habits, and patterns of thought from both his parents. From James, he'd gained technological aptitude and business acumen, skills he was already applying to develop apps for language acquisition. From Elena, he'd inherited academic rigor and linguistic precision. Together, they had created something greater than the sum of its parts, a methodology that was transforming lives around the world. The Reyes-Anderson Protocol, as it had come to be known, had been implemented in special education programs across the country and was spreading internationally. "But the true measure of success," Michael continued, his voice softening, "isn't found in brain scans or vocabulary assessments. It's found in moments of connection, when a child who has never spoken suddenly points to a glass and says agua, or water, or shui. When parents hear "I love you" for the first time from a child they feared might never speak." He paused, emotion briefly overtaking his professional demeanor. "These are the moments that matter. These are the bridges we build with words." Eleanor felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Beside her, James was similarly affected, his hand tightening around hers. "I'd like to conclude with a demonstration," Michael announced, gesturing to the side of the stage. A young girl of about 7 walked out, accompanied by her parents. She moved with the slightly awkward gait characteristic of some children on the spectrum, her eyes downcast, her hands fluttering occasionally at her sides. "This is Lily," Michael introduced her. 6 months ago, Lily had a vocabulary of fewer than 10 words, all in English. Today she's going to show you what she's learned through the multilingual approach." He knelt to the child's level, speaking softly to her in a mixture of English and Spanish. The girl's face lit up, and she began naming objects Michael pointed to on a tablet screen, first in English, then in Spanish, then in simple Mandarin phrases. The audience watched in fascinated silence as this child, once limited in expression, moved fluidly between languages. "Lily isn't just learning words," Michael explained as the demonstration continued. "She's discovering that there are many ways to name the world, many paths to making herself understood. Each new language gives her another chance to be heard." When the demonstration concluded, the audience erupted in applause. Lily beamed with pride, taking a small bow before returning to her parents. Michael resumed his position at the podium. "8 years ago, I was Lily," he said simply. "Trapped in silence, desperate to connect. One person with the right approach made all the difference." He looked directly at Elena. "That person was my mother, Dr. Elena Reyes-Anderson, who risked everything to give me a voice. And the language that ultimately saved me wasn't English or Spanish or Chinese. It was love." The standing ovation that followed was thunderous. Elena found herself pulled to the stage, James beside her, as Michael embraced them both before the appreciative crowd. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for academic journals and news outlets that had followed their story over the years. Later, at the reception in the elegant atrium of the MIT Media Lab, colleagues and admirers surrounded them. Eleanor had long since grown accustomed to academic recognition. Her return to professional life had been accompanied by honors and distinctions she'd never sought but gratefully accepted as validation of her work. As she chatted with a neurologist from Stockholm, Eleanor noticed Michael deep in conversation with Patricia Cunningham by the refreshment table. The elderly neighbor, now in her 70s, had become an unlikely ally in recent years. Her initial hostility transformed into remorseful support after witnessing the impact of her actions. It had taken Elena years to forgive the woman whose anonymous report had nearly destroyed their family. The breakthrough had come during the final asylum hearing, when Patricia had unexpectedly appeared to testify, not against Elena, as everyone feared, but in her favor. "I made a terrible mistake," she had told the court. "I acted out of prejudice and misunderstanding. What I've witnessed since then is nothing short of miraculous, a family forming around a child's needs, transcending boundaries of language and culture." Now, Patricia was a regular visitor to their home, teaching Michael gardening and listening. With genuine interest to his linguistic discoveries, the transformation reminded Elena that growth and change were possible at any age, that hearts could open even after decades of narrowness. "You've created something remarkable," the Swedish neurologist was saying, drawing Elena's attention back to their conversation. "Not just a therapeutic approach, but a movement." "We've been fortunate," Elena acknowledged. "The right circumstances, the right support, the right child." "More than fortunate," the neurologist insisted. "Visionary. You saw possibilities where others saw only limitations." James appeared at her side, champagne flutes in hand. "Speaking of vision," he said, offering her a glass, "wait until you hear our latest news." "Michael?" Their son joined them, excitement evident in his stance. "We're expanding the program," he announced. "Dad's company is funding a global initiative. Multilingual intervention centers in 10 countries to start, with plans for 20, more within 5 years. It's a natural evolution of the security business," James explained, "from protecting data to protecting potential, helping children communicate securely with the world." Elena looked between her husband and son, these two who had become the center of her world. "When did you finalize this? You didn't tell me." "We wanted it to be a surprise," Michael grinned, "a graduation present." "And there's more," James added. "Tell her the rest, Mikey." Michael's expression softened. "We're establishing a scholarship fund for refugee children with neurodevelopmental differences. It's called the Fernando Reyes Memorial Scholarship after—" He paused. "After my other father. The one I never met, but whose courage helped create our family." Elena felt the champagne glass nearly slip from her fingers. In their new life, she rarely spoke of Fernando, the husband whose journalism had ultimately cost him his life. The pain was still too raw, the memories too fragile to share widely. But Michael had asked questions over the years, piecing together the history of the woman who had become his mother. And now this, a tribute that honored both her past and their future. "Michael," she whispered, unable to find more words. He embraced her, this child-turned young man who had once been locked in silence. "It's what he would have wanted," he said softly. "His work was about giving voice to the voiceless. So is yours." As the evening progressed, Eleanor found herself on the balcony overlooking the Charles River, taking a moment of quiet reflection amid the celebration. Boston had become truly home now, the city where she had rebuilt her life, reclaimed her professional identity, and formed a family she had never dared to imagine. James joined her, draping his jacket over her shoulders against the evening chill. "Penny for your thoughts, Professor." She smiled at the familiar endearment. "I was thinking about journeys, how sometimes the longest ones lead exactly where we're meant to be." He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Any regrets?" Eleanor considered the question. Seriously, there were losses, certainly. Her homeland, colleagues and family members, left behind, years spent in hiding rather than advancing her research. But regrets? "No," she said finally. "No regrets. How could I regret the path that led to this?" Below them, the lights of Cambridge reflected in the dark water. Inside, their son was captivating a group of international researchers with his ideas for expanding the language program. Beyond them stretched a future neither Elena nor James could have imagined separately, a future built word by word, day by day, choice by choice. "You know," James said thoughtfully, "when Caroline left, I thought that was the end of our story, mine and Mikey's. I couldn't imagine a new chapter, let alone a whole new book." He turned to face her. "Thank you for showing us that the most beautiful stories are often the ones we never planned to write." Elena leaned into his embrace, thinking of all the words in all the languages she knew, searching for the ones that could express the fullness of this moment. In the end, she chose the simplest. "Te amo," she whispered. "I love you." "Wo aini," he replied, his pronunciation carefully practiced over years of joining their language sessions. Michael's voice came from behind them. "Are you two being romantic again? Because there are about 20 linguists in there who want to talk methodology with Mom." They turned to find him leaning against the doorway, his expression a mixture of mock exasperation and genuine affection. "5 more minutes," James bargained. "Your mother and I are having a moment." Michael rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "Fine, 5 minutes. Then I'm sending in the Swiss delegation. They're particularly persistent." As he disappeared back inside, Elena laughed softly. When did he become the responsible adult in this family? "Probably around the time he started correcting my pronunciation in 3 languages," James replied with a grin. They turned back to the view, savoring the quiet moment together. The journey had been long and often treacherous, from a woman fleeing persecution to a renowned professor, from a silent child to an articulate young scholar, from a man frozen in grief to one embracing a future he never expected. What bound them together wasn't merely circumstance or legal documents or shared living space. It was something more profound, the daily choice to understand each other, to communicate across differences, to build bridges where barriers might have stood. In any language, that was the definition of family. As they rejoined the reception, Eleanor watched Michael in his element, explaining complex linguistic concepts, switching effortlessly between languages, his entire being alight with the joy of communication. From silent child to voice of a generation, his journey embodied everything she had dedicated her life to proving, that within every person, no matter how silent, lives a voice waiting to be discovered. And in that discovery lies the